The man who tried to throw Naomi Reed out of the Aurelia Grand Midtown did not know he was pushing the owner of the entire hotel chain back into the rain. He did not know the woman in the soaked gray coat, faded jeans, and scuffed boots had signed the final acquisition papers less than 48 hours earlier. He did not know that by sunrise, a boardroom full of terrified executives would be replaying his words on a security screen. He only saw a tired black woman with no jewelry, no entourage, no designer luggage, and no visible proof that she belonged beneath the crystal chandeliers of a five-star hotel. That was his first mistake. His second was believing that power always announces itself before entering a room. Outside, Manhattan was drowning under a late autumn storm. Inside, the Aurelia Grand glowed with gold light, polished marble, white orchids, and quiet money. Naomi paused near the revolving door and let the warmth settle over her wet coat. She had come tonight to discover whether Aurelia Grand was worth saving. Naomi's holding company had acquired control quietly so the old management would not know she was watching. Tomorrow morning, Reed Global Holdings was scheduled to announce a rescue plan worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Tonight was not about money. Tonight was about truth. Naomi never trusted reports alone. Reports were written by people who knew they were being judged. Real culture revealed itself in unguarded moments, especially in the way staff reacted when someone arrived without the costume of wealth. That was why Naomi had come without a driver beside her, without a diamond watch, without anyone whispering her name before she entered. She crossed the lobby slowly, aware of the glances following her. A couple near the bar looked once, then again, with the discomfort of people seeing something they believed had wandered into the wrong frame. A bellman stepped forward, hesitated, then stepped back when he saw her scratched suitcase. Naomi noticed everything, she always had. At the reception desk, a young woman with auburn hair and a name tag reading Lily Carter looked up and smiled. It was not the polished smile of someone performing kindness for a richer guest. It was simply a smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Aurelia Grand Midtown. How may I help you?" Naomi placed her phone on the counter. "I have a reservation under Naomi Reed." Lily typed the name, and her posture changed when the reservation appeared. Naomi saw the flicker in her eyes, not judgment but surprise. The presidential suite. 3 nights. Full payment confirmed. No mistake. Lily recovered quickly. "Yes, Miss Reed. I have your reservation right here. May I please see your identification?" Naomi handed it over. Lily checked it, nodded, and reached toward the keycard machine. That was when Victor Hale entered from the private elevators, tall, silver-haired, immaculate in a navy suit that looked more expensive than most people's rent. His name was not displayed anywhere, but the room bent around him. Bellman straightened. The concierge lowered his voice. Lily's hand paused. Naomi watched him watch her. His eyes moved over her wet coat, her suitcase, her boots, her face, and with every passing second, the temperature in his expression dropped. "Is there a problem here, Lily?" he asked. His voice was smooth enough for guests and sharp enough for staff. Lily turned carefully. "No, Mr. Hale. Miss Reed is checking into the presidential suite." Victor did not look at the screen. He looked at Naomi again, and this time he almost smiled. "The presidential suite," he repeated, as though Lily had announced that a stray dog had requested a private dinner table. "I see." Naomi said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence made certain people reveal themselves faster. Victor stepped closer. "May I ask how this reservation was made?" "Online," Naomi said. "Direct booking. And you are certain you are at the correct property?" "I am certain." Victor folded his hands in front of him. "You must understand, Miss Reed, that the presidential suite is not a standard accommodation. We have had incidents involving fraudulent bookings, stolen cards, misunderstandings of price, and guests who did not fully grasp the nature of this establishment." The words were wrapped in velvet, but the insult underneath was bare. A man near the concierge desk turned his head. A woman in a fur-trimmed coat slowed her steps. The lobby began to listen. Naomi looked at Victor calmly. "My identification matches the reservation. The room is paid for. What exactly needs to be clarified?" Victor's jaw shifted. "We will need to verify further." Lily spoke before she could stop herself. "Mr. Hale, The system shows the payment cleared and the identification matches. I can complete the check-in. The silence that followed was small but dangerous. Victor turned to her with a smile that held no warmth. Thank you, Lily. I will handle this. Lily lowered her eyes, but she did not step away from the keyboard. Naomi noticed that too. Victor leaned toward Naomi. Perhaps it would be best if you stepped aside while we resolve this. Our lobby is very busy this evening, and we have several VIP arrivals expected. There it was. Not a refusal, not yet, just a quiet attempt to move her out of the center of the room, out of sight, out of the image the hotel wanted to sell. Naomi returned her gaze to Victor. I am also an arriving guest. Of course, Victor said, in a tone that meant anything but of course. However, our standards require discretion. Naomi let the word hang between them. Discretion. She had heard that word in banks when a loan officer doubted her first company. It was one of the polite words people used when they did not want to say the uglier word underneath. Lily's hand curled into a fist, then relaxed. Miss Reed, she said softly, would you like some water while I finish checking the reservation? Victor looked at her so sharply that the question died in the air. That will not be necessary. Then he gestured toward the side of the lobby, near a hallway leading to service elevators. This way, please. Naomi did not move. My room key, please. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Victor's face hardened. Miss Reed, I am trying to prevent an embarrassing situation. For whom? Naomi asked. A bellman looked down. Lily swallowed. Victor's smile disappeared. For everyone, he said. Then, in a voice that carried farther than he intended, he added, this hotel has standards. Not everyone who walks through those doors belongs here. The words spread across the marble like spilled wine. Naomi looked at the chandelier, then at the security cameras tucked into the ceiling corners, then back at Victor. She felt no surprise. Disappointment, yes. Confirmation, yes. But not surprise. I understand, she said quietly. Then you will step aside? Victor asked. Naomi picked up her identification and slid her phone into her coat pocket. No, she said. I understand exactly what your standards are. For the first time, Victor seemed uncertain. Then he recovered, lifted one hand, and signaled to security. Two men in black suits moved from near the entrance. Lily's face went pale. Mr. Hale, please, she whispered. Victor ignored her. Naomi stood perfectly still as the security guards approached, rainwater dripping from the hem of her coat onto the shining floor. She looked alone to them, perhaps, easy to remove, but inside her coat pocket, her phone was already recording. In a locked inbox across town, her legal team was waiting for a single message. In less than 12 hours, every person in that lobby would learn that the woman they thought did not belong had been the only one with the authority to decide who stayed. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice to a final warning. Do not make this difficult. Naomi looked at him with an expression so calm it almost unsettled him. Mr. Hale, she said, you have no idea how difficult tomorrow is going to be. The two security guards stopped a few feet from Naomi, close enough to make their purpose clear and far enough to pretend this was still hospitality rather than intimidation. Victor Hale stood between her and the reception desk as though his body alone could protect the Aurelia Grand from the disgrace of her presence. Around them, the lobby had gone strangely quiet. Conversations continued in low fragments near the bar. Silverware touched porcelain in the restaurant beyond the archway. Rain struck the tall front windows in shining sheets, but everyone within sight understood that something was happening. Naomi could feel the attention moving over her like cold air. She had been in rooms like this before, rooms where people looked at her and decided quickly, privately, confidently, and almost always wrongly. A woman in a cream coat near the elevators lifted her phone as if checking a message, though the lens was tilted toward the lobby. A man with a gold watch whispered something to his wife and smiled without kindness. The security guards exchanged a glance, waiting for Victor's instruction. Miss Reed, Victor said, his voice lowered now but still sharp. I am giving you one final opportunity to step aside quietly. If there has been a misunderstanding, we will handle it discreetly. Naomi looked past him to Lily, whose face had lost most of its color. The young receptionist had one hand resting near the keyboard, the other still holding the blank key card that should already have opened the presidential suite. There is no misunderstanding, Naomi said. My reservation is valid. My payment is confirmed. My identification matches. Your employee verified all of that. Victor's eyes flicked toward Lily, and the warning in that glance was immediate. Lily swallowed, but to her credit, she did not deny it. That is correct, she said quietly but clearly. The reservation is valid. The words landed in the lobby like a small act of rebellion. Victor turned slowly toward her. Lily, he said, you are very new here, so I will explain this once. A screen does not make a guest appropriate for this property. Judgment is part of your training. Presentation matters. The image of this hotel matters. Our guests expect a certain environment. Naomi's mouth did not move, but something behind her eyes sharpened. There it was again. The language of exclusion dressed up as policy. Presentation, image, environment, words that sounded harmless until they were used as locked doors. Lily's voice trembled, but she answered anyway. Respectfully, Mr. Hale, if a guest has a confirmed reservation, I do not think we can refuse check-in because of how she is dressed. A faint gasp escaped someone near the concierge desk. Victor stared at Lily as though she had slapped him. You do not think, he repeated softly. That is exactly the problem. Then he turned back to Naomi, his professionalism thinning by the second. I apologize for the confusion. Our staff member has overstepped. This matter will be corrected. Naomi tilted her head. Will it? Before Victor could respond, the man with the gold watch stepped forward from the bar, carrying the loose confidence of someone who believed every public room was partly his. He was in his late 50s, broad in the face, expensive in a careless way, with a glass of amber liquor in his hand and a dinner jacket stretched across his shoulders. Victor, he said, loud enough for the lobby to hear, is everything all right here? My guests are arriving soon, and I would hate for this kind of scene to be the first thing they see. Victor's expression changed instantly. Warmth returned, false but polished. Mr. Preston Vale, my apologies, we are handling it. Preston Vale looked Naomi up and down with open amusement. Handling what exactly? Did someone lose their way from the service entrance? A few people laughed, not loudly, not bravely, but enough. Naomi looked at him for the first time. He expected embarrassment. He expected anger. What he saw instead was stillness, and it made his smile flicker. Victor did not correct him. That was the moment Naomi marked most carefully. Not the insult itself, but the silence that followed from the man responsible for the hotel. Lily lowered her eyes, then raised them again. Sir, she said to Preston, Miss Reed is a guest. Preston turned toward her, amused now by the idea that anyone at the desk would challenge him. A guest of what? He asked. The storm shelter? This time the laugh was louder. Victor's mouth tightened, but not in disapproval. He was irritated that Lily had prolonged the scene, not that Preston had humiliated a woman in his lobby. Naomi felt her phone warm in her pocket, recording every word. She did not need it for herself. She needed it for later. For the people who would claim tone had been misunderstood. Context had been missing. Intentions had been good. The truth often required documentation because people with power were skilled at editing memory. Mr. Hale, Naomi said, I would like you to state clearly whether you are refusing to honor my reservation. Victor's face hardened. I am refusing to allow a disturbance in my lobby. I am not disturbing anyone. Your presence has already caused concern among our guests. My presence? Naomi repeated. Preston gave a short laugh. Come on, sweetheart. Look around. This is not a bus station. Lily flinched at the word sweetheart, but Naomi did not. She simply turned her eyes to Victor again. Is this how your hotel allows guests to speak to other guests? Victor clasped his hands behind his back. Mr. Vale is a long-standing patron of this property. That was not my question. For the first time, Victor lost the smoothness of his control. Enough, he said. You will leave the lobby now, or security will escort you out. Lily stepped from behind the desk. Mr. Hale, please do not do this. Victor turned on her fully. Return to your station. She has a paid reservation. Return to your station or you will no longer have one. Lily stopped, but she did not move back. Her eyes were bright, frightened, and furious. Naomi looked at her and saw the cost of courage in real time. Not the grand kind celebrated later, but the small kind that makes your hands shake while you do it. Victor took one step toward Naomi's suitcase. We are finished here. He reached down and grabbed the handle before Naomi could stop him. The gesture was not violent, but it was ugly. It carried all the contempt he had managed to keep hidden behind words until now. He dragged the scratched suitcase across the marble. One wheel caught on the edge of the lobby rug, tipped, and the bag fell sideways near the entrance. The zipper strained open. A paperback book, a folded scarf, and a small leather notebook slipped out onto the floor. The lobby went silent again, but this silence was different. Even Preston Vale stopped smiling for half a second. Victor straightened as though nothing improper had happened. "There," he said. "Your belongings are by the door." Naomi walked slowly to the fallen suitcase. She did not rush. She did not kneel in humiliation. She bent with the calm precision of a woman picking up evidence. First the scarf, then the notebook, then the book. She closed the suitcase and set it upright. Rain flashed against the glass behind her. From somewhere near the elevators, a phone camera caught the scene. The security guards looked uncomfortable now, but neither moved to help. Naomi turned back toward the desk. "Lily Carter," she said. Lily blinked. "Yes? That is your full name?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Naomi held her gaze for a moment. "Thank you for trying to do the right thing." The words almost broke Lily. She looked down quickly, as though receiving kindness in that moment was harder than receiving anger. Victor scoffed. "You are making this more dramatic than necessary." Naomi looked at him one last time. "No, Mr. Hale, you made it exactly as dramatic as it needed to be." Then she turned and walked toward the revolving doors. No one stopped her. No one apologized. No one offered an umbrella. The doorman, who had watched everything from his post, stared at the floor as she passed. The storm swallowed her the second she stepped outside. Cold rain struck her face and coat, but Naomi felt clearer in it than she had under the chandeliers. A black sedan waited at the curb half a block away, its headlights blurred by water. Her driver, Malcolm, hurried out with an umbrella, but Naomi lifted one hand to stop him. She wanted the last few steps in the rain. She wanted to remember the feeling of leaving her own hotel, as though she had been unworthy of shelter. Inside the car, the city became a smear of gold and gray beyond the windows. Malcolm closed the door gently and looked at her in the mirror, alarmed by her expression but trained enough not to ask before she spoke. Naomi removed her wet glasses, wiped them with the edge of her sleeve, and took out her phone. The recording was still running. She stopped it, saved it, and sent it to Marcus Ellison, her lead counsel, with no explanation except 3 words: "Pull the contracts." Then she called Joanne, her chief assistant, who answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Cancel tomorrow's announcement," Naomi said. Joanne was silent for exactly 1 breath. "All of it?" "All of it." "Freeze the management retention agreements. Notify legal to preserve every second of lobby camera footage from 8:45 onward. I want the employment file of Victor Hale, the complaint history for Aurelia Grand Midtown, and every unresolved discrimination claim across the chain on my desk before sunrise." Joanne's voice changed, becoming colder, sharper. "What happened?" Naomi looked through the rain-streaked window at the glowing entrance of the hotel, where Victor Hale still stood beneath the chandeliers, believing he had protected something valuable. "I checked in," she said quietly, "and they showed me exactly who they are." For several seconds after Naomi Reed disappeared into the storm, no one inside the Aurelia Grand Midtown moved, as if they had witnessed anything worth remembering. That was the peculiar talent of polished places. They could swallow cruelty almost instantly, cover it with soft music, straighten the rug, wipe the marble, and continue pretending the world inside their walls was civilized. Victor Hale adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, gave the fallen lobby rug a brief look of irritation, and turned toward the security guards with a nod that dismissed them as easily as he had summoned them. Preston Vale released a low chuckle, lifted his glass, and said, "Well handled, Victor. Standards are standards." Victor accepted the compliment with the faintest incline of his head, though something about the woman's final expression remained in his mind longer than he liked. She had not left like a defeated guest. She had left like someone making a record of a crime scene. He pushed the thought away. People like her always threatened consequences when embarrassed, he told himself. They demanded managers, wrote reviews, exaggerated details. and eventually disappeared into the noise of the city. He had survived far worse than one angry woman in a wet coat. "Lily," he said without looking at her, "reset the desk and complete the arrival list, mister. Vale's event guests will begin arriving within 20 minutes, and I do not want this unpleasantness affecting service." Lily stood behind the reception counter with both hands pressed flat against the marble surface, trying to slow her breathing. The key card she had prepared for Naomi still lay beside the terminal, blank and useless. She could still see Naomi bending calmly to pick up the scarf and notebook from the floor. She could still hear the way Naomi had said her full name, not as a warning, but as if she wanted to remember it accurately. "Mr. Hale," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We should document what happened." Victor turned then. "There is nothing to document." She had a confirmed reservation. She was disruptive. She was quiet. The words left Lily before she had decided whether they were safe. Victor walked back to the desk slowly, and the closer he came, the smaller the lobby seemed to become. "You are 8 months into this position," he said. "Do you know how many employees have ruined promising careers because they mistook emotion for judgment?" Lily said nothing. "This hotel does not run on sentiment. It runs on discretion, hierarchy, and the understanding that the guest experience must be protected from anything that damages it." "She was a guest," Lily said. Victor's eyes cooled. Not anymore. He held her gaze long enough to make the threat clear, then turned and walked toward Preston Vale, already changing his face into warmth for people he considered worth impressing. Lily remained frozen until the next arrival stepped to the desk and handed her a passport. She checked them in, smiled, because training had taught her how to smile while feeling sick, gave directions to the elevator, and continued moving through the next 15 minutes, as if her body belonged to someone else. But the thought would not leave her. Naomi Reed, Presidential Suite, paid in full. The name glowed in her mind like a warning light. When the lobby thinned, and Victor moved toward the event floor, Lily opened the reservation again. The system showed exactly what she already knew. Full payment confirmed, identification verified, suite assigned, guest status active but not checked in. She clicked deeper into the profile notes, expecting nothing. Instead, a small red banner appeared across the top of the screen. Restricted executive visibility. Lily's mouth went dry. Ordinary guests did not have restricted executive profiles. Celebrities had aliases. Diplomats had security notes. High net worth clients sometimes had preference files, but restricted executive visibility was different. It meant someone above property level had placed controls around the guest identity. Lily glanced toward the lobby to make sure Victor was gone, then opened the internal memo board. For weeks, rumors had moved through the staff about a change in ownership. No one had been told much, only that a major announcement was scheduled for the next morning and that the Aurelia Grand brand was entering what corporate called a new era of strategic leadership. Lily searched the phrase. The first memo was general and useless. The second was locked. The third had been sent to department heads but mistakenly copied to the front office training folder. She opened it and saw the name Reed Global Holdings. Beneath it was a sentence that made her hands turn cold. Chairwoman Naomi Reed will be present for select transition meetings following the ownership announcement. Lily stopped breathing. She opened a browser on the staff terminal and typed Naomi Reed Global Holdings. The image results loaded first. There she was. Not in the soaked gray coat, not with rain on her glasses, but seated on a conference stage in a black blazer, composed and unsmiling, the same steady eyes looking out from every photograph. Founder, chairwoman, real estate investor, hospitality acquisition leader, estimated net worth in the billions. Lily covered her mouth with one hand. The lobby suddenly looked different to her, not grander but uglier. Every chandelier and marble column transformed into evidence of what had just happened beneath them. She printed the reservation record before she could talk herself out of it. Then she checked the security system access available to front desk supervisors. She was not supposed to pull lobby camera clips without approval, but the system allowed short incident exports for guest disputes. Her hands shook as she selected the window from 8:45 to 9:15, the entrance camera, the main desk camera, and the wide lobby angle that had captured Victor dragging Naomi's suitcase across the floor. The file took nearly 4 minutes to process. During those 4 minutes, Lily watched the elevator bank with a fear so sharp it made every sound feel like a footstep behind her. When the download finished, she saved it to the incident folder and attached it to an email. She began writing, erased the first line, started again, and forced herself to be factual. At approximately 8:52 p.m., a guest identified as Naomi Reed arrived at the front desk to check into the presidential suite. Her reservation was valid, paid, and matched her identification. General Manager Victor Hale intervened, questioned the legitimacy of the booking, instructed the guest to step aside, allowed another guest, Mr. Preston Vale, to make derogatory comments, threatened the front desk employee for objecting, summoned security, and physically moved the guest's suitcase toward the entrance. The guest left the property without being checked in. Lily read the paragraph 3 times. It sounded too small for what she had seen, but facts often look small when written down. She attached the reservation, the memo mentioning Naomi Reed, and the camera clips. Then she stared at the recipient line. Sending it to Victor would bury it. Sending it to local HR would probably circle back to him before sunrise. So Lily searched the corporate directory and found the regional director of human resources, the general counsel's office, the transition team for Reed Global Holdings, and an executive assistant listed under ownership liaison. She added all of them before courage could drain out of her. At 12:18 a.m., Lily pressed send. The moment the email left her outbox, she felt both relieved and terrified, as if she had stepped off a ledge and was waiting to discover whether there was ground beneath her. Across town, Naomi Reed sat in her private office on the 52nd floor of Reed Global's headquarters, still wearing the damp clothes she had worn into the hotel. Her coat hung over the back of a chair, leaving small, dark drops on the polished floor. Marcus Ellison, her lead counsel, stood beside the conference table with a tablet in his hand, playing the recording she had sent from her phone. Joanne sat across from Naomi, already coordinating preservation notices, contract holds, and emergency briefings with a calm efficiency that had carried them through hostile takeovers and midnight lawsuits. No one in the room raised their voice. That was not how Naomi handled anger. Anger was a fire, useful, but only if contained. On the screen, Victor's voice filled the room. Not everyone who walks through those doors belongs here. Naomi looked away for a moment, not because the words surprised her, but because they had traveled too far through her life to arrive here as strangers. She thought of her mother, Denise Reed, coming home from hotel shifts with swollen feet and hands smelling faintly of bleach, telling Naomi to study hard enough that no one could ever decide her worth by the uniform she wore. Denise had cleaned suites she could never afford to sleep in, smiled at guests who never learned her name, and apologized to managers for complaints that were not her fault because rent was due and Pride did not pay electricity bills. Naomi had built an empire partly from brilliance, partly from discipline, and partly from the quiet vow she had made as a child watching her mother fold a hotel uniform at midnight. One day, she would own the rooms where women like her mother had been made invisible. Now she owned them. And still, a man like Victor Hale had stood beneath her chandelier and decided that dignity was something he could grant or withhold. Marcus lowered the tablet. We can cancel tomorrow's announcement and freeze management retention immediately. If we move before market rumors form, we control the first document trail. Naomi nodded. Do it. Joanne looked up from her laptop. The hotel just generated an incident email from a front desk employee. Lily Carter. She attached footage. Naomi's expression changed only slightly. Send it to the main screen. The video appeared. This angle was clearer than Naomi's phone. It showed Lily attempting to intervene. It showed Victor threatening her job. It showed Preston Vale laughing. It showed the suitcase falling. When it ended, the room remained quiet. Marcus finally said, "That employee may have saved us from a cover-up." Naomi looked at Lily's name on the email header. No, she said softly. She saved herself from becoming part of one. At 3:00 a.m., formal notices went out. The public announcement was canceled. The management retention agreements were suspended. All hotel surveillance footage, employee communications, complaint logs, and guest incident records were placed under legal hold. At 4:37 a.m., Richard Bellamy, interim CEO of Aurelia Grand Hotels, woke to 7 missed calls. 3 urgent emails, and one subject line that made his stomach drop before he opened it. Read Global Transition halted pending investigation. He read Lily Carter's report first. Then he watched the lobby footage once, then again, then a third time with the sound on. When Victor's voice said, "Not everyone who walks through those doors belongs here," Richard closed his eyes. His wife stirred beside him and asked what was wrong. Richard sat in the blue light of his phone, suddenly aware that the most expensive crisis of his career had begun with a suitcase on a marble floor. "We threw her out," he whispered. "We threw the new owner out of her own hotel." By 6 in the morning, the Aurelia Grand Midtown was awake in the way luxury hotels wake before the city does, quietly, expensively, with carts rolling over thick carpet, silver coffee pots being polished, flowers being replaced before a single guest could notice the old ones had begun to bow. In the grand ballroom on the second floor, technicians adjusted microphones for the ownership announcement that was supposed to begin at 10. A step-and-repeat wall already displayed the Aurelia Grand crest beside the words, "A New Era of Excellence." White orchids stood in tall glass columns. Champagne had been chilled. A breakfast table had been arranged for executives, investors, and invited members of the press. Every detail suggested confidence, continuity, and control. None of it was true anymore. Richard Bellamy arrived at the hotel at 6:42 a.m. Without shaving, wearing yesterday's tie and the face of a man who had spent the last 2 hours watching his career walk toward a cliff. His assistant followed behind him, speaking into one phone while holding another, but Richard barely heard her. He crossed the lobby and saw the spot near the entrance where Victor had dragged Naomi Reed's suitcase only hours earlier. The marble was clean. The rug had been straightened. The orchids had been refreshed. That, somehow, made it worse. A place could erase the physical evidence of disrespect in minutes. Erasing the consequences would not be so easy. Victor Hale stepped out from near the elevators wearing a charcoal suit, silver tie, and the polished expression he reserved for important mornings. He saw Richard and smiled. "Richard, good morning. We are fully prepared upstairs. Press check-in begins at 9. Mr. Vale's group left excellent feedback, by the way. Despite a minor situation last night, we handled everything." Richard stopped walking. "A minor situation." Victor's smile hesitated. "A walk-in issue. Front desk confusion. Nothing that should interfere with today." Richard looked at him for a long moment, wondering whether Victor was lying or simply so convinced of his own judgment that reality could no longer reach him. "Come with me," Richard said. Victor's expression tightened. "Of course." They took the private elevator to the executive conference room on the 38th floor, where the regional legal director, the head of human resources, 2 board members, and 3 senior transition officers from Reed Global were already waiting. Lily Carter sat at the far end of the room, looking as if she had not slept. She had been called in at dawn and told only that her incident report had been received. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she stared at the table with the frightened stillness of someone who had done the right thing and was now waiting to learn whether the world punished that sort of thing. Victor noticed her immediately. "Why is she here?" he asked. Richard closed the door. The room felt airless despite the wall of windows looking out over a pale, rain-washed Manhattan morning. On the screen at the front of the room was the paused image of Naomi Reed standing at the reception desk in her soaked gray coat. Victor saw it, and for the first time that morning, something moved across his face that was not confidence. "Before we begin," the legal director said, "Mr. Hale, you should understand that this meeting is being recorded and that Reed Global has placed all relevant property records under legal hold." Victor's eyes moved from the screen to Richard. "Legal hold? For what?" Richard did not sit. "For what happened in our lobby last night." Victor gave a controlled breath, the kind meant to suggest patience with unreasonable people. "I can explain. The woman was disruptive. She could not provide a credible reason for booking the presidential suite. The property had several high-value guests on site, and I made a judgment call to protect the brand." One of the Reed Global officers, a woman named Maren Cole, leaned forward. "Did her identification match the reservation?" Victor glanced toward Lily. "I was not satisfied that the circumstances were appropriate." "That was not the question," Maren said. Lily lifted her head. Her voice was quiet. "Yes, the identification matched. The payment was confirmed. The reservation was active." Victor turned toward her sharply. "Lily is inexperienced. She does not understand the discretion required in luxury hospitality. Marin clicked a remote. The video began. There was Naomi entering the frame, crossing the lobby, approaching the desk. There was Lily greeting her. There was Victor arriving and looking Naomi over with the careful contempt he had not known the camera could read so clearly. Then came the words, "This hotel has standards. Not everyone who walks through those doors belongs here." The room did not react outwardly, but the silence changed. Victor watched himself on the screen, and his face slowly lost color. The footage continued. Preston Vale appeared, laughing, making his service entrance comment, then his bus station remark. The camera showed Lily attempting to intervene. It showed Victor threatening her job. It showed him grabbing Naomi's suitcase, dragging it across the marble, and letting it fall near the door. The suitcase tipped open. Naomi bent to gather her things. The image froze on that moment. The owner of the entire hotel chain kneeling on the lobby floor, while the general manager stood over her in a tailored suit. Richard closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, he looked directly at Victor. "Did you know who she was?" Victor swallowed. "No." "And you believe that helps you?" Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. "Richard, with respect, if this woman is who you are suggesting she is, then of course I regret the misunderstanding. But no one informed us she would be arriving in this manner. A chairwoman of a global investment firm does not normally enter through the front doors in wet jeans and no security. There should have been protocol. There should have been notification." Lily looked at him then with open disbelief. Marin's voice was cold. "So your position is that, miss? Reed was owed dignity only if you had been warned she was powerful." Victor's face flushed. "That is not what I said." "It is what you practiced," Marin replied. The room went still again. At that moment, Richard's assistant opened the door and stepped inside, pale and breathless. "I am sorry to interrupt. The announcement cancellation has leaked. 2 financial outlets are reporting that Reed Global has halted the transition pending a service misconduct investigation. A clip from the lobby is online." Richard turned toward her. "How much of the clip?" "Enough," she said. "It shows the suitcase." One of the board members cursed under his breath. Victor stood too quickly. "A clip? Who released that?" No one answered, because the source no longer mattered. The story had escaped the walls. Downstairs, phones began to vibrate in the pockets of managers, concierges, servers, and bellmen. Guests in the breakfast room looked up from their coffee and watched the same 23 seconds spread across their screens. A drenched woman being humiliated in a 5-star lobby, followed by the caption claiming she was Naomi Reed, the billionaire investor who had just purchased Aurelia Grand Hotels. By 8:30, the first news van stopped outside. By 8:45, 3 corporate partners had requested urgent calls. By 9:00, the press check-in table for the celebration had become an emergency media barrier. The phrase thrown out of her own hotel appeared first in a local business blog, then in a national headline, then everywhere. In the ballroom, workers quietly removed the champagne glasses. Upstairs, Victor sat rigidly as legal counsel informed him that he was being placed on immediate administrative suspension pending termination review. "You cannot do this based on one night," he said, his voice thinner now. "I have given ye." "No, Victor. Based on one night, we discovered what those 12 years allowed you to become." A knock came at the conference room door. Everyone turned. The door opened, and the room rose before anyone told it to. Naomi Reed walked in wearing a black suit, her hair pulled back, her expression composed enough to make the panic around her seem childish. Marcus Ellison entered at her right. Joanne followed at her left with a tablet against her chest. Naomi's eyes moved once around the room, stopping briefly on Lily, then on Victor. He looked suddenly smaller than he had in the lobby. Naomi placed a key card on the table, the blank one Lily had never been allowed to activate, now sealed in an evidence sleeve. "Last night," she said, "I came here to inspect a room. I left having inspected a culture." No one spoke. Naomi continued, her voice calm and even. "The acquisition announcement is canceled. The management retention package is canceled. Effective immediately, Victor Hale is removed from all operational authority. The Midtown property will undergo an independent cultural audit, and every complaint of discriminatory treatment from the past 5 years will be reopened. Until that review is complete, no executive bonus, no leadership contract, and no public expansion plan moves forward. Victor gripped the edge of the table. Miss Reed, I sincerely apologize. I did not know who you were. Naomi looked at him then, and the room seemed to tighten around the silence. That, she said, is the exact reason you are not fit to lead this hotel. Victor's face collapsed, not into remorse, but into the stunned fear of a man realizing that the hierarchy he trusted had turned around and pointed at him. Naomi shifted her attention to Lily. Miss Carter, please stay after this meeting. I would like to speak with you. Lily's eyes filled, but she nodded. Downstairs, camera flashes lit the glass doors where Naomi had walked out into the rain hours earlier. Upstairs, the people who had built a luxury brand on the appearance of excellence finally understood that appearance was the cheapest thing in the room. The cost of truth had arrived, and it had arrived before breakfast. By noon, the story had outgrown the hotel. It was no longer a private failure contained inside the Aurelia Grand Midtown, no longer a management issue that could be softened by a statement about regrettable misunderstandings and ongoing reviews. It had become the kind of public judgment that moved faster than lawyers, faster than executives, faster than the careful language corporations use when they hope the world will become distracted. The clip of Victor Hale dragging Naomi Reed's suitcase across the marble floor appeared first as a short, shaky upload from a guest's phone, then as a clearer security angle on a business news account, then as a split screen beside Naomi's public profile, her company valuation, and the announcement that Reed Global Holdings had frozen the acquisition transition pending investigation. The headline wrote itself in every direction. Billionaire owner thrown out of her own hotel. But to Naomi, that was the least important version of the truth. Sitting in a temporary executive suite 3 blocks away from the hotel, she watched the coverage without expression, while Marcus Ellison summarized partner reactions, and Joanne moved through calls with the speed of someone stitching a wound before the bleeding could become fatal. 3 corporate event clients had paused contracts, 2 luxury travel agencies had suspended preferred placement. A banking partner wanted assurance that the acquisition would not collapse entirely. The old Aurelia board wanted to know whether Naomi planned to walk away. The press wanted a statement. Everyone wanted something. Naomi wanted the files. Not the statement drafts, she said when Joanne offered the communications folder. The complaints. Joanne nodded and placed a thick digital report on the main screen. What appeared there was worse than Naomi had expected, though not worse than she had feared. Over the past 5 years, the Midtown property had logged 27 guest complaints involving discriminatory treatment, inappropriate assumptions about ability to pay, unequal service at check-in, denial of access to amenities, or security being called without clear cause. 6 had involved race directly. 4 involved guests in casual clothing being challenged in public areas. 3 involved delivery workers or personal assistants being spoken to harshly in front of paying guests. 2 involved housekeepers reporting that managers had instructed them to avoid eye contact with high-profile visitors because, in the words of one complaint, invisible service is elegant service. Naomi read that phrase twice. Invisible service. She thought of her mother again, of the way Denise Reed used to come home from the hotel with stories she told lightly because telling them heavily would have crushed both of them. The guest who snapped his fingers instead of saying "excuse me." The manager who told her to apologize after a woman accused her of stealing earrings later found in a purse. The child who asked why a lady like her was allowed in the fancy rooms. And the father who laughed instead of correcting him. Naomi had spent years turning memory into strategy, pain into capital, capital into control, but control did not erase what memory knew. This is not Victor alone, she said. Marcus looked up. No. It is a pattern. Then we do not treat him as the whole disease. Across town, Victor Hale sat in his apartment with the blinds half closed and the television muted, watching his own downfall loop on 3 different channels. His phone had not stopped vibrating since morning, but the messages had changed in tone. At first they were from colleagues asking what happened, whether the clip was real, whether he was all right. Then came the reporters. Then came strangers. Then came silence from the people whose approval had once seemed permanent. Preston Vale had issued a statement through his assistant, claiming his comments had been taken out of context and that he had no knowledge of the guest's identity at the time. Victor had read that sentence several times, feeling a strange and desperate resentment that Preston had managed to make the same excuse sound more polished. No knowledge of the guest's identity. That was the line everyone reached for when exposed. It was also the line that seemed to make Naomi Reed's face grow colder every time it was spoken. Victor's attorney arrived in the early afternoon, a compact woman named Ellen Marsh, who charged by the hour and spoke as if sympathy were inefficient. She told him not to call anyone, not to post anything, not to apologize publicly without review, and absolutely not to contact Naomi directly. Victor listened for 20 minutes and then said the thing he had been thinking since the conference room. I need to explain to her that I did not know. Ellen looked at him over her glasses. Victor, that is not an explanation. That is an admission of the problem. I would never have spoken to her that way if I had known who she was. Exactly, Ellen said. Stop saying that aloud. But by late afternoon, fear had begun to do what pride had not. It forced Victor to look, not deeply enough for repentance, not yet, but closely enough to understand danger. At 5:30, through his attorney, he requested a private meeting with Naomi Reed. Marcus advised against it. Joanne advised that any meeting be recorded. Naomi sat quietly as they spoke, then said she would give him 30 minutes the next morning. No negotiation, no cameras, no promise of forgiveness. Victor arrived at Reed Global headquarters wearing a dark suit and no tie, which made him look less like a humbled man than a man attempting to select the correct costume for humility. He was led into a conference room with glass walls and no view, a deliberate choice by Naomi, because she did not want drama borrowing power from the skyline. When she entered, he stood too quickly. Miss Reed, he said, thank you for seeing me. Naomi sat before telling him to sit. Marcus remained near the wall. A recorder sat openly on the table. Victor looked at it, swallowed, and began the apology he had rehearsed all night. He said he regretted the incident. He said emotions had escalated. He said he had been under pressure because of VIP arrivals and the ownership announcement. He said he had spent 12 years protecting the reputation of the Aurelia Grand, and that, in the moment, he believed he was preserving the environment guests expected. Naomi listened without interrupting. That, somehow, made him speak more. He said Lily was inexperienced. He said Preston Vale's remarks were unfortunate but outside his control. He said the storm, the unusual presentation, the lack of advance notice, and the sensitivity of the presidential suite had all contributed to his error in judgment. Then he finally said it. But I want you to know, Miss Reed, that I would never have treated you that way if I had known who you were. Naomi looked at him for a long time. Victor seemed almost relieved, as if he had reached the truest part of his apology. Naomi folded her hands on the table. Mr. Hale, she said, that sentence is not the defense you think it is. Victor's face tightened. I only meant... I know exactly what you meant. You meant respect was available. You simply did not think I qualified for it. He inhaled, but no answer came. Naomi's voice remained steady. You looked at my coat, my suitcase, my shoes, my skin, and you decided there was no consequence attached to humiliating me. You did not make one mistake. You made a series of choices. You ignored a valid reservation. You ignored your employee when she told you the truth. You allowed another guest to insult me because he looked more valuable to you. You called security. You touched my belongings. You performed my removal in front of an audience because part of you believed that audience would agree with you. Victor stared at the table. For the first time since entering, he had no polished answer. Naomi continued, and now something older moved beneath her calm. My mother cleaned hotel rooms for 22 years. She knew men like you, not always cruel in ways that could be written up, sometimes courteous, sometimes praised, but always certain they could measure a person's worth by how expensive they looked standing in a lobby. She taught me that luxury without dignity is just decoration. Last night you proved her right. Victor's eyes reddened. Whether from shame, fear, or exhaustion, Naomi could not tell, and she did not grant him the comfort of pretending it mattered. Can you forgive me? He asked, the word smaller than he likely intended. Naomi was silent long enough for him to understand that the answer would not save him. I do not know, she said, but forgiveness is not reinstatement, it is not reputation repair. It is not a shortcut around consequence. What you do after losing power will tell you more about who you are than anything you did while holding it. The meeting ended there. Victor left through the same quiet corridor by which he had entered. No cameras waiting, no crowd, no audience to perform for. Later that day, Naomi met Lily Carter privately. Lily arrived with red eyes and an employee folder clutched to her chest as though she expected to be dismissed despite everything. Naomi offered her coffee. Lily shook her head, then apologized for not doing more. Naomi stopped her gently. You did what everyone around you chose not to do. You told the truth while it could still cost you. Lily looked down. I was scared. Courage usually includes fear, Naomi said. Otherwise, it is just comfort. By evening, Reed Global issued its first public statement. It did not name Victor beyond confirming his removal. It did not claim the problem had been solved. It announced an independent audit, reopened complaint channels, employee protection for reporting misconduct, and a temporary suspension of all executive bonuses tied only to revenue metrics. The statement ended with one line. Naomi wrote herself, "Hospitality begins before a guest is identified, before wealth is proven, before status is known." By the next morning, the world had moved to fresh arguments, fresh outrage, fresh headlines. But inside Aurelia Grand, something more difficult than outrage had begun. People were being asked not simply who had failed, but what kind of system had taught them to look away. 3 months later, the Aurelia Grand Midtown reopened its front doors on a bright winter morning that looked nothing like the night Naomi Reed had walked out into the rain with her suitcase in her hand and humiliation following her across the marble. A floor. The chandeliers were still there. The orchids were still white. The marble still shone beneath the footsteps of guests who arrived with leather bags, wool coats, tired children, nervous smiles, and ordinary lives wrapped around them like invisible luggage. But something in the hotel had changed in a way that could not be captured by renovation photographs or press releases. The change was not in the walls. It was in the way the doorman stepped forward before deciding whether someone looked important. It was in the way the front desk staff greeted every person before asking for a name. It was in the way security guards had been trained to observe without assuming, assist without humiliating, and intervene only with facts rather than instinct dressed as authority. Naomi had refused to rename the hotel. Several advisors had suggested it, arguing that the Aurelia Grand name carried too much damage now, too much memory, too much public embarrassment. Naomi had listened and then said no. She did not want to paint over failure and call it reform. She wanted the building to remember what had happened, because organizations that forget their worst moments usually repeat them in more expensive ways. So the name remained, but the operating system underneath it was rebuilt clause by clause, policy by policy, person by person. Every employee had gone through mandatory dignity training, not the hollow kind where people clicked through slides and signed a digital form, but live sessions built around real incidents from the company's own files. Managers were no longer rewarded only for revenue, occupancy rates, and VIP retention. Their bonuses now depended partly on anonymous guest dignity scores, employee reporting confidence, complaint resolution quality, and third-party audits that no property manager could edit before corporate saw them. A new reporting channel allowed any employee, from housekeeping to valet service, to send concerns directly to an independent ethics office without passing through their supervisor. Naomi had insisted on that herself. A culture cannot be honest, she had told the board, if truth has to ask permission from the person most likely to bury it. Lily Carter had changed too. At first, she had moved through the hotel like someone afraid the floor might disappear beneath her. She had become publicly associated with the incident after her report was mentioned in an internal memo that eventually leaked, and the attention frightened her more than she admitted. Some people called her brave. Some called her disloyal. A few former employees blamed her for the firings that followed, as if the camera had lied and the suitcase had moved itself. Naomi had watched Lily endure all of it with a kind of quiet steadiness that reminded her of young women she had known in the early years of her career, women who had to decide whether doing the right thing was worth becoming visible. By the time the hotel reopened, Lily was no longer working the front desk. Naomi had placed her in a leadership development role under the new director of guest experience, not as a reward without responsibility, but as an investment. Lily studied complaint systems, service recovery protocols, staff coaching, and the difficult art of correcting someone without humiliating them. On the morning of the reopening, she stood in the lobby wearing a simple black suit and a name tag that now read Lily Carter, Guest Dignity Lead. She still looked nervous, but she no longer looked small. Naomi arrived without an entourage, just as she had the first time. She wore a camel coat, plain black trousers, and the same wire-rimmed glasses she had worn on the night Victor Hale decided she did not belong. No one announced her over an earpiece. No manager rushed ahead to prepare the staff. She stepped out of a car across the street, carried her own small bag, and walked toward the entrance with the calm of a woman who understood that real tests were useless if everyone saw them coming. A new doorman, a young man named Andre, opened the door before she reached it. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Welcome to the Aurelia Grand." He did not say her name. Naomi smiled slightly because that was the point. He did not know her, and still he treated her as if she belonged. Inside, the lobby moved with quiet order. A family from Ohio stood near the front desk, the father checking a reservation on his phone while the mother tried to calm a crying toddler. An elderly woman in a faded purple coat sat near the fireplace with a canvas bag at her feet, looking uncertain about where to go. A delivery driver asked the concierge for directions to the service elevator, and instead of being waved away, he was walked there politely. Naomi saw these details the way other people saw artwork. Each one mattered. Each one was proof of whether the new language had become behavior. Near the fireplace, the elderly woman in the purple coat struggled to lift her canvas bag. Lily noticed before Naomi did. She crossed the lobby, knelt slightly beside the woman, and said, "May I help you with that?" The woman looked surprised. "I am only here for the scholarship ceremony," she said, as if that made her less worthy of assistance than a paying guest. Lily smiled. "Then we are honored to have you." Naomi stopped walking. The scholarship ceremony was being held in the ballroom for the children and grandchildren of hotel workers, funded by a foundation Naomi had created in her mother's name. The woman in the purple coat was the grandmother of a housekeeping supervisor's son, the first in his family to be accepted into college. She was not famous. She was not wealthy. No magazine would ever profile her. But Lily carried her bag as though she were the most important arrival of the morning, and for Naomi, that single gesture was worth more than any headline about reform. The official reopening event began an hour later. Reporters filled the back of the ballroom. Executives sat in the first two rows, looking more careful than proud. Employees stood along the walls, some still unsure whether this new era would last or fade once the attention moved elsewhere. Naomi walked to the podium without notes. She looked across the room and let the silence settle before she spoke. "A hotel can survive bad press," she said. "It can survive financial losses. It can survive leadership changes, lawsuits, and public embarrassment. What it cannot survive, not in any meaningful way, is forgetting what people are owed when they walk through its doors." She paused, and the room became still. "3 months ago, I entered this building as a guest. I was not treated as one. But the failure of that night was not only one man's cruelty. It was a system that allowed too many people to believe dignity was something to be granted after status had been proven. That belief ends here." Lily stood near the side wall, eyes bright but steady. Naomi turned toward her for a moment. The future of this hotel was not saved by the most powerful person in the lobby that night. It was protected by the one person who was willing to tell the truth when silence would have been safer. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then full. Lily lowered her head, not in shame this time, but because recognition carried its own weight. Naomi waited until the room quieted again. Luxury is not marble. It is not champagne. It is not the price of a suite or the name on a reservation. Luxury at its highest form is care. And care that depends on wealth is not care at all. It is performance. In the months that followed, Aurelia Grand did not become perfect. No institution does simply because a powerful person demands it. There were still mistakes, still difficult guests, still managers learning that control and leadership were not the same thing. But complaint numbers became clearer because people trusted the reporting system enough to use it. Employee retention improved because workers believed someone might listen. Guest satisfaction rose not among celebrities or executives alone, but among families, older travelers, service workers, first-time visitors, and people who once would have been treated as if they had entered through the wrong door. Victor Hale disappeared from the public story, as people like him often do once the spotlight no longer serves them. Preston Vale eventually returned to private rooms where men like him apologized only when money required it. But Lily stayed. Naomi stayed. The hotel stayed, not as proof that harm can be erased, but as proof that harm can be answered with structure, memory, and consequence. On the evening after the reopening, Naomi stood alone near the same entrance where her suitcase had fallen. The rain had been replaced by a soft winter dusk. A young woman in a worn coat entered hesitantly, looked up at the chandeliers, and stepped toward the front desk. The receptionist smiled before checking the reservation. Naomi watched, and for the first time since the night had happened, the lobby did not feel like evidence. It felt like a promise being kept one guest at a time. And maybe that was the only kind of change that ever mattered. Not the loud apology, not the viral headline, not the ruined career of a man who confused authority with worth, but the quiet moment afterward when someone with no visible power walks through a door and is treated as fully human before proving a single thing. If this story moved you, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever seen someone judged unfairly because of how they looked, what they wore, or where people assumed they belonged? Tell us what you think, because sometimes one honest voice, like Lily's, is enough to expose a broken system and begin changing it.